Well, first of all, I never believed that I would be Secretary of State.
My first reaction was, with all of those kids out there fighting and dying and doing their duty, how can I not do mine if the president thinks I can help?
Henry Kissinger and I are really good friends, and he invited me to come and speak somewhere, and he introduced me and he said, "So Madeleine, welcome to the fraternity." And I said, "Henry, it's not a fraternity anymore."
I was sworn in under a portrait of Benjamin Franklin, and I was being sworn in. It occurred to me to uphold a constitution that once counted my ancestors as 3/5 of a man, and I was being sworn in by a Jewish woman Supreme Court Justice, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And so my first thought was, what would old Ben have thought of this? It just said wonders to me about how far our country had come.
I was quite nervous about going into the State Department for the first time, but when I walked through those front doors and I was met by a huge throng of Foreign Service officers and Civil Service officers and staff, I have to say it just lifted me up and energized me for the work ahead.
Representing this country is one of the great honors of my life.
After World War I and after World War II, in both cases, the world was in chaos. After World War I, we looked it over and walked away. And then after we looked back after the end of World War II with people like Truman and Atchison and Marshall, and they said to themselves, what a crummy world. And then they said, we're part of it, whether we like it or not. And they set out to see if they couldn't produce something better.
George Marshall has always been a great model of mine. Just imagine what we saw back in the late 1940s. Those who were our enemies were about to become our friends. We're about to become democracies.
And when you look at America, that the greatest generation created coming home from that war, the most prosperous, safest country in history, there's the proof in the pudding right there.
The genius of those who designed America's engagement with the world after World War II was that they saw that it was also in our interest to be involved in the world.
America needs to be at every table where decisions are being discussed and made that either directly affect us or indirectly. And in this interconnected world in which we find ourselves, I would argue that most decisions end up affecting us.
You don't have to be a genius in order to understand that you can't deal with climate change alone, or a pandemic alone, or nuclear proliferation alone.
America always has to be there. And when we step away, guess what? Somebody else with less responsibility or standing than we have would take our place.
The challenge is really, how do you exercise international leadership without becoming global policemen? And the answer is, you have to strengthen the non-military instruments of power.
And keep our diplomats foremost. Keep them out in front on foreign policy.
Not the U.S. telling people what to do, it's the U.S. leading the building of a consensus.
Many senior flag rank officers from our military would echo my view of the importance of the civilian role that is played in our national security policy.
What I love about USGLC is that it actually leverages what is really the strength of America, which is that it's done by stakeholders and civil society groups and
Business, of academia, of all parts of American society that have an interest in what's going on in our world and the role that America plays or should play in the world.
We are a democracy where you have to have the people committed to a course as well.
It's a force multiplier, frankly.
That's our responsibility now.
Sooner or later, those of us who have been a part of this fight for a while are going to pass from the scene, and somebody has to be there to take up that challenge and that mantle. Start now.
Young people need to remember, even if they want to ignore the rest of the world will not ignore them. And whether it's in their jobs or in their lives more broadly, we have to be engaged in the world.
So I have the greatest hope in the young generation, and I think they are prepared to deal with the challenges of the 21st century.
You are the future, and we placed it in your hands. Do well.
Never lose sight of the fact that our fundamental power comes from our power of inspiration.
It positions us better, it leverages our assets better, if we are a leading voice and force for development as well as diplomacy and defense.
America is at its best when it leads from principle as well as power, when it leads with its values and its compassion.
We are the most powerful country in the world. We have more riches and resources than any other country in the world, and have had it that way for many, many decades now. And so when we see problems around the world, we see nations that are in trouble, we're America. We reach out to people. We've done it over and over again because that's who we are.